Thus we see the end of the telepath story, at least for now. I guess I should say we see the end of Byron's story, but that's not 100% true, is it? Because, well, I'll get to it later. It is interesting to see how Bester and Byron both engage each other on a personal level. I'll talk more about that later, because it's obvious why Byron does it. See, Byron was actually part of Omega Squadron. Nice little bit of continuity, since we actually already knew about Omega Squadron back in Season 4, I want to say. 3 or 4, actually. I'm not sure which. I actually don't remember. It was back when Bester betrayed Omega Squadron for the sake of his lover in order to help B5 out and blah, blah, blah. It is interesting to me how Byron flat out admits that he hated it. He hated killing. He hated the innocent blood on his hands. And yet, even as he's reciting this, he continues to recite that line, "They're only mundanes." Bester says that. Byron says that. A couple of the hostage takers say that. I don't think they're given lines. So, evil guys say that. And I'm just going to call them that, by the way. I know what you're going to be like. Oh, my God, you're just looking at this. No, seriously. Sometimes in fiction, whether for good or for bad, you write a character to be the bad guy. And that's what that one guy was. Yeah, we're going to go and we're going to take all these hostages, these medical hostages, and then we're going to murder them all if we don't get what we want. Yeah! And then there's a scene where Franklin, who is a doctor, and you can't tell me they don't know that. I mean, there's a pretty good chance that these guys know who Franklin is personally. There's an even better chance, in fact, I'd say close to 100% chance that they know that Franklin is a doctor who's like, hey, you can't hurt him, you can't move him. He's not in any condition to do that. And their response is to shoot at him and threaten him. Reasonable people, right? But of course these people aren't reasonable. Which brings me to my another point. It is interesting to note, once again, the variance between Bester's side and Byron's side, because Byron's side is an unruly, desperate, fear-mongering mob. Now, when I say fear-mongering, I need to clarify that for a moment, because obviously they're trying to sow fear amongst others, but they're also pretty effectively sowing fear amongst themselves. We see in them, multiple times, just in this episode, panic. Straight-up panic. And trying to incite panic in others. You don't understand, they're going to take us, they're going to take us, blah, blah, blah. That kind of a thing. Meanwhile, Bester's side doesn't actually, I think, say a single line the entire show, other than Bester himself, of course, who is crisp and professional as always, with one exception, which I'm building up to. So, after shooting at a doctor and taking hostages and all that, we have an interesting series of circumstances. It's probably the first time we've ever actually seen Byron be truly reasonable in his negotiations. As I've pointed out before, Byron does not know what he's doing when it comes to this job that has been hoisted upon him. He's certainly trying, he certainly cares, and credit where credit is due. And I think I've made it clear that I don't actually like Byron that much. The character, not the actor. But it is interesting how it took violence and a messed up situation for him to finally acquiesce to being reasonable. And then, of course, when everything goes to hell, Bester reaches out to Byron. Why do you think Bester did that? I'm really curious. I know I've said this before, but I want to make this clear. I love hearing your guys' comments on these episodes. I don't respond to all of them, but I read every single one of them. It's fascinating, and I love seeing different people's reactions and perspectives. I've had a lot of people disagree with me on opinions and viewpoints. I've had some people agree with me, but only kind of. I love hearing everyone's thoughts about these episodes, especially since B5 usually leaves it up to you, the viewer, to decide what's going on, or more accurately, why it's going on. So, why did Bester reach out to Byron personally? Effectively after he'd lost. The Alliance had come in politically and militarily and diplomatically and said, no, we're in charge of this situation. We have negotiated a settlement. The terms have already been agreed to. The other side's already kept their bargain. We're going to keep our end of the bargain. Let's deal with this. Real quick, there's actually a great bit later on where Sheridan just points to him and straight up says, you know, why is Bester here? And Sheridan says, I don't know, and then immediately rushes off to Bester. It's actually a great bit, and it's a very military thing to do. You want to make it very, very clear, this is not on me, I still adhere to our bargain. It's actually a very political thing to do as well. We're still, we're still in this. Don't back out. I haven't backed out. Let me deal with this. And he just conveys all that with those three simple words. I don't know. Go to Bester. It's a nice little touch. Anyways. So why did Bester personally reach out to Byron and try to talk him back in? Is it because he lost and was trying to cut his losses? Is it because he feels some personal connection with Byron? We do know he cared about Omega Squadron after all, even though he betrayed them in that one episode. But he still nevertheless mentioned, that was his baby, that was his pet project. Maybe it's because of what he mentioned at the end. After it's all said and done, Bester, Walter Koenig, as ever, nails it. He's standing there and he's like, I don't understand. Even after everything, I really thought we were on the same side, and I thought someone just needed to explain it to them. Just to help them to understand that. I don't understand. And what's funny is, he says, we were on the same side. We had a common enemy. And Sheridan, rather acerically, says, yeah, us mundanes. Bester doesn't even rise up to the challenge. Almost every time Bester's been on camera, almost every time, when someone jabs at him verbally, he jabs right back. Usually from the I'm being reasonable and you're being a dick perspective. That's his particular preference for how he verbally spars. But he doesn't even try. And in the fact that he doesn't try, you could see this has actually bothered Bester. Something has actually gotten to him. But as for the specifics of what, well, that's up to you. Quick note. I do like this episode, and I do like Season 5 as a whole. I do. The more I'm going through this, even with analysis mode on, I'm being reminded that I do actually enjoy Season 5. But episodes like this kind of help to remind me why Season 5 is just not as good. I'm sorry. I should add, in my opinion. But in my opinion, this is just not as good. I kept noticing holes in the writing style. For example, you don't have this big, tense standoff, and then calm everyone down, and then spend like a solid 90 seconds, I should have actually timed it, of an inordinately long amount of time where the action just grinds to a halt, and these two lovers have a tearful, melodramatic discourse between each other. And everyone's just giving them the moment. Everyone's just like, yeah, okay, go ahead. It's cool. It's okay, it's the lovers' clause. They get to just say whatever they want as they're there and have a tender embrace. And then, they're finally like, okay, well, they're going to commit suicide in the way that they highlighted like a minute and a half ago. God. And then Byron kills himself, and his followers who go with him. And thus, Byron finally becomes a flag. I mean, he's basically been a flag this whole time. I keep emphasizing that point. But now he has literally become a flag, as we hear in the Garibaldi proclamation towards the end there, when he's listening to the news thing. Psycop headquarters bombed. Remember Byron. Thanks, Byron. But, as ever, it's not 100% his fault. It's just kind of how things lined up. Brings me to my next point. I'm going to pause and talk about something that I don't want to talk about. B5 just keeps doing this to me. I'm going to talk about terrorism and hostages. Now, this is probably the closest we get to this topic here in B5. This will come up later in other shows that I know I'm going to be covering in the future. And we'll do actually a full in-depth discussion of terrorism and hostages, actually, later. Right now, I do want to discuss a couple of things. First and foremost, the definition of terrorist has been warped and misused many times, just like every other adjective in the English language. I mean, seriously. I bet a lot of you out there are gamers, right? Well, how many of you heard the term gamer misused as a label? How many of you heard the term casual or elitist misused as a label? I'm not even going to touch that whole topic. My point is, the term terrorist has been tossed around a little bit too much, especially about 5 to 15 years ago, give or take, roughly. Thing is, real terrorism is actually pretty obvious and apparent once you spot it. Like, it's not like you... I've heard the argument before, and I've always disagreed with this, that there's no functional difference between a terrorist and a military operation, and I adamantly disagree with that statement, and I always have, ever since I first heard it. It's from a... I don't remember... I'm not going to say it. I don't remember the specifics. It was from an actual real-life military general who was giving a speech about the concept back in the 90s, I want to say. But the point is, these guys are definitively terrorists at this point. When you are actively trying to coerce someone to do what you want through terror, through actively causing harm, and in both a physical and psychological method, you are officially a terrorist at that point. I'm sorry. Now, again, that definition could be stretched, but my point is, whatever definition you write down in the books, you can spot it when you see it, which is why I bring up these guys, and specifically the guys who charge into the med bay and take hostages, which is just wow. Speaking of which, we finally get to see what actually happened to Garibaldi that we saw the bit of all the way back in Deconstruction of Falling Stars. We finally get to see the actual situation of what happened there. Good to know he survived. The reason I really want to bring this up, though, is the hostage thing. See, hostages are a no-win scenario. They always have been. There is no clean-cut answer to the hostage scenario. The ideal to a hostage scenario is you infiltrate or you... I actually can't think of the name of the word. You use force to invade. There's actually a term for that when it comes to a personal level thing, and I can't actually think what that's called right now. Anyways, you get in there somehow, you get the hostages out, and you get the hostage takers in. That's the ideal. And if you notice, that's pretty much usually the norm, in real life as well as in fiction. But the thing is, it's almost never that clean cut because of the nature of what a hostage situation means. Because if the hostage takers shoot, hurt, or kill the hostages, they have lost their bargaining chips, and therefore they have become powerless. But if we outside allow them to kill the hostages, we have lost something of value that is the only thing we actually value in this situation, really. It is the primary focus point, the objective, if you will. And therefore we lose. You see how this is kind of a messy situation. And I bring it up because there really is no negotiating with hostage takers. It doesn't work that way. Ignoring the obvious fact that the moment you, as Sheridan himself put it, open that door, there's no closing it, there's no going back. There's also the fact that you are dealing with people who are willing to murder to get what they want. Those are not people who you could sit down at the negotiation table with and be like, so, I'm thinking that if we give 15% more of this particular commodity, then we will get 37.6% back of your commodity. No, you can't negotiate with people like that. They're diseased, okay? It's just, you know? But of course, it's also a no-win situation for the hostages themselves. Because anyone in a hostage situation, especially in the modern era, knows that you got like 3 options. You're killed by the hostage takers to either make a point or because they're not getting what they want. You're killed by the hostage takers because the people try to breach. That's the term I was thinking of earlier. Nobody sent me a comment about that. So someone tries to breach in and you are killed in the ensuing scuffle. Or, on a really rare chance, you get out of this alive, either because you were one of the lucky ones who wasn't shot or killed or whatever, or because the breach actually went well. And that's about the sum of it. You'll notice I've never listed a circumstance, by the way, in which negotiating and giving in to the hostages leads to a good situation. That's because it doesn't. Ignoring the fact that most people don't negotiate with hostage takers in real life and in fiction, for the obvious reasons I just listed, historically speaking, it's almost always the thing that people don't do. And that brings me to my final point. Because I didn't just bring that up to bring it up, although there's more I could talk about that topic. You only take, my opinion, we're entering opinion mode. Opinion mode! You only take hostages. I say that so I don't say, in my opinion, like 5 times over the next paragraph here. In my opinion, you only take hostages when you are either very desperate, very stupid, or very diseased in your brain. And that's it. Those are the only options. Because you're desperate enough because you've lost. You have lost. You are fighting a losing battle. You need to do something, anything to make this work. And if it goes badly, oh well. It was already going badly, right? Or because you are sufficiently afraid of something, and you are so willing to avoid whatever it is you are afraid of, that you are willing to do things you would never consider doing, things that are that you know intellectually aren't going to work out, but you got to do something. Or, of course, you're an idiot. I mean, that's also possible. Let's just leave that over there. Or, of course, there's just something wrong with you. I don't know if there's anything necessarily wrong with most of the hostage takers in this episode, with the exception of the long-haired guy, the guy who is reading the list of demands from the paper. I get the very strong impression, based on how he was acted, that he's... and probably shouldn't be alive anymore. Just putting that out there bluntly. At least the other gentleman, the one who we saw in the previous episode as well, one of the militant leaders, at least he is desperate and afraid. Mr. Longhair guy is just... Anyways. Let's talk about Garibaldi. Let's move on from that topic. No good can come of talking about hostages either. It's truly a no-win scenario. So, here's a question for you. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Would Garibaldi have shot? Before he was provoked, I want to make that clear. A lot of people will do things they wouldn't normally do when they're provoked. And Bester very clearly provoked Garibaldi. But before he was provoked, in a vacuum, assuming there's no mental blocks, assuming Bester wasn't cooperating, refused to compromise the core, do you think Garibaldi would have shot him? Knowing what that means for him, knowing that he would lose pretty much everything for petty vengeance, do you think Garibaldi would do that? Now, I ask this question because I don't actually know the answer to it. However, I do have to step in and analyze this a little bit, because this is, I think, the third instance, actually, first of 3 instances of kind of bad writing in this episode. I mentioned that earlier with the, hey, let's give the lovers a second and the melodrama of their reaction. That's the second instance of bad writing. This is the first. Garibaldi says, I've been thinking about this for a long, long time, and I can't wait to shoot you, blah, blah, blah. This is not that far into Season 5. He only found out about all of this at the very end of Season 4. It hasn't been that long. And in addition to that, as much as he may have a grudge against Bester, Garibaldi is not the kind of guy who is just going to shoot someone because he dislikes them. That's just not the kind of person he is. And on top of all that, this feels like the kind of thing that should have been built up over a long period of time, but was instead shrunk to a single season. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that from an out-of-character perspective and from an analytic perspective, I don't think Garibaldi would have shot from what we know of him, but I think the show is trying to convince us he would shoot without willing to establish that in character. This is why I say this is an instance of bad writing, because the character pretty much flat out tells us, no, I'm going to shoot you, even though that doesn't quite line up with everything we know about the character. When you have to straight up tell the audience something, rather than show it, infer it, build up to it, or establish it, then you've generally... I'm not going to necessarily call it bad writing. That's going a bit too harsh. It's not good writing. Let's put it that way. It is not the ideal way to write a scenario. I do like one bit about that scene, though. Bester walks over and says, tell me something. Honestly, on a scale of 1 to 10, how stupid do you think I am? I did like that line. And it makes perfect sense, because Bester isn't stupid. Of course he did something like this. I mean, why wouldn't he? So then we see the deconstruction shot. Then we do see a great scene. There's actually a really great scene where Sheridan is pacing, talking about Garibaldi, and it's obvious he's actually worried. This again shows why I feel they kind of mishandled the Garibaldi situation back in Season 4. Because it's obvious that Sheridan and Garibaldi are actually friends. They have been friends in basically every episode since the mind control thing was removed. So, yeah, it's just a good scene. I don't actually have much else to add to that. I do want to add one other thing, though. So Garibaldi, this is the third instance of not good writing. Garibaldi comes in, is down. He looks like there's something wrong with him. Franklin, good at viewing people, good at reading people, looks at Garibaldi and says, something's up with this guy. Something's wrong. And Garibaldi says, hey, do you know anything about mental blocks, psionic blocks or telepathic blocks in the mind? And Franklin says, well, yeah, but oh no, hostage situation. Now, gee, I wonder what could possibly be going on there. Maybe we should ask him about it. No, that'd be ridiculous. Or maybe we could infer what's going on. No, that would be insane. Why would we ever do anything like that? I really hate it when an episode goes out of its way to flat out state the blatantly obvious and then shrug it off. That's the kind of thing I expect from a kids show because okay. Slight tangent. I've actually been exposed to a lot of kids' television in the last 4 years because of my niece. And one of the things that consistently drives me crazy is when they treat the audience as if they're stupid. Now, I know what you're saying. Oh, well, it's for a kid. Kids aren't stupid. I know that sounds weird to say that, but they're not. Kids can put two and two together very quickly and very easily. There's no reason for kids' television to treat kids as if they're stupid, and that's why it bothers me. So, I bet you know what I'm talking about, too. Let me just make up an example off the top of my head here. Hey, Bob, wow, you look like you're on fire, which usually means that the fire elemental from across the plains, which has been missing lately, might be having something to do with that. And maybe that has to do with this crystal that has to go off of the fire elemental plains, but it's not there right now. Oh well, shrug. I guess Bob's just having an off day. Go on with my life. Nah, that's a really dumb example, but it's the best I could do off the top of my head. Point being, I bet you've seen that scenario before, and it drives me crazy when I see it in a kid's show. It drives me insane seeing that in Babylon 5. Come on! And that would be the third instance I referenced. One small touch I did like. Garibaldi had to go out and buy booze. Now, I know that sounds like a duh, and it is, but it is a little detail that is relevant because Garibaldi had no alcohol on hand. Why would he? It would actually be incredibly out of character if he had alcohol hidden away somewhere. Because any recovering alcoholic will tell you, if you know it's there, that's a problem. Because you know where it is in your house. It doesn't matter how much you hide it, you're the one who hid it. It might as well just be out in the open at that point. So, we have now resolved the Byron situation. He has finished his evolution. He has evolved into a flag. And I guess we'll see where things take us next time. See you around, guys.